Hello there. This is Making Connections in the Secondary Classroom. I'm Christy Kenny Kitchen, a K-12 teacher, namely teaching high school, grades 11 and 12. I've taught middle school and at the college level. I'm also currently serving as a Cal State University Fullerton student teacher supervisor. The writing and materials included in this presentation are copyrighted. They may not be duplicated without the author's written permission. So what you will leave with today: ideas that you can use in your classroom tomorrow, journal prompts to help you establish your classroom connections. So this entire presentation is based on Erik Erikson, a German-born American psychologist and child psychoanalyst who developed a theory on the psychosocial development of the human being, looking at the different age stages from birth through old age. The theoretical, as Erikson stated, belief that adolescence is one of the more important stages of human development leads us to understand just how crucial the school setting is to a person's emotional growth. Therefore, students who have strong social and emotional adjustments are more likely to perform better academically. Healthy interactions and relationships with their peers as well as with adults are key to their success both in and out of the classroom. Further, a safe and healthy environment encourages the process of emotional regulation, impulse control, and social understanding, all key components to the healthy development of the child. So how do we do this? Well, I've narrowed it down to 4 components over my years of teaching that I have found useful in establishing a connection. And they are having a welcoming physical environment, getting to know your students, being an authority, not an authoritarian, and keeping a positive, judgment-free classroom. So the physical environment ideas are listed here. And this one is probably the easiest of all of the 4. Some possibilities are placing desks into groups so that students are required to interact and they get over their fears of talking, because when they talk to each other, they start to feel comfortable, then they can talk and participate in class discussions as a group. Turning off overhead fluorescent lights, which have been shown to cause migraines and eye strain. Using lamps around the room. I found some $12 lamps at Target many years ago. Of course, they've gone up in price. And I have probably 6 of them around my classroom that just give off a nice soft glow. Putting up Christmas lights outlining bulletin boards or hanging from the ceiling. Hanging motivational posters and quotes around the room. A lot of these can be found at like the Dollar Tree, and they just stick directly, they're vinyl, they stick directly to the wall and can be removed if you need to change rooms or your administration wants you to. Replacing desks with tables, if at all possible. Also using flexible seating. So having different types of seating around the room. So for this one, we have a journal topic, a little bit lengthier. You might want to take a picture of this journal topic. Here it is. What do you envision your class looking like physically? It's a great idea to put some time and effort into this, especially if you're at the beginning of your career. Taking a day or 2 prior to the start of the school year to really outline the classroom, maybe even take some measurements, figure out where you want things to go, is crucial to this piece. Now, be as detailed as possible with this. Describe the space in your journal response, the types of seating you'd like, the lighting, the color of the bulletin boards, the type of decor you'll incorporate. And then think of storage options as well. Where will you store the books, the supplies? Where will you physically teach? Will you walk around the room all period? Will you teach from a podium at the front of the room? Will you sit down at your desk to begin and then get up and maneuver through the groups? Is it easy for you to maneuver around the students based on the seating options? So grab your phone, take a picture of this for you to respond to later. The next item is getting to know students. Beginning the year with some kind of collaborative activity sends a caring message to our students. Already on day one, we are conveying that what they have to say is important and who they are is important. They will see that ours is a classroom that values ideas, sharing, and critical thinking. To prepare students for the future, we must be the kind of educators who listen and help guide students along the path that will allow them to achieve their goals. If we're warm and flexible, and our students will appreciate us more for it. So here are some sample get to know you activities. Find someone who. There are a lot of different activities like this online that you can find on Teachers Pay Teachers, Etsy, and so forth, where you get a signature of other students fitting a particular description. Find someone who has the same color shoes as you. Find someone who has a birth date in the same month as you. And this forces students to get up and move around and introduce themselves to new students. They have a task they have to accomplish. Maybe you're offering points for it or a reward of some kind. And engaging with them in this, doing this activity with them, shows that you are interested in getting to know all students as well. Another idea, I saw this in had this in one of my college classes. My college professor did this, and I was so impressed because I had never been in a college class where a professor actually wanted to know who we were. But having students get into a large circle and going around the circle, memorizing the names. So you sit in the circle with them, go to your right, ask them, introduce yourself, turn to the right, ask that student to introduce them by their name and perhaps one interesting fact about them or one thing that nobody knows about them. Then I repeat my name and I repeat, as a teacher, I repeat their name. Then the next student goes. Then when that student has finished sharing, I repeat my name, the first student's name, the second student's name. And it becomes a game for students to watch to see if I'm going to mess up. And at some point, I usually do mess up. Another option would be to have students write a one-page summary about themselves. Something that's interesting about them, something that maybe they have found keeps them from learning, struggles they've had in class or in school. And that helps you to understand what you're looking at, what you're dealing with, and adjustments you might need to make as you move forward with the year. And finally, another item, information cards. It's a little old school, but it's also kind of nice to have these tactile items, I find. Pass out index cards and have them fill in their name, contact information, and challenges that might keep them from doing homework. So it might be they're in sports. They have a lot of AP classes. They have to babysit right when they get home because their guardians are working all the time. Maybe they're in foster care. And of course, with all these things, it's important to let them know that these are, excuse me, private things, private matters, and you're not going to share it with anybody else. No one else will read them but you, except for the first two bullet points there. It is also important to remember that we are mandated reporters. And if they share something about themselves that has to do with abuse, drug use, harming themselves or others, and it's present, then we are obligated by our careers to report that to the appropriate authorities. I always like to mention those things before I have them fill out these activities, before I have them do these things, so that they are going into it willingly. And if they are sharing something of a sensitive nature, that they are doing so knowing that I'm going to have to take action. So our journal prompt for this: what activities do you do or could you do to get to know students? What will you do to help your students get to know you? Go ahead and take your phones, take a picture of this so that you can focus on get to know you activities. Now that brings us to our third item on making connections. In the course of 30 years of teaching, I've noticed a lot of teachers struggle with this. This is certainly one that we need to put a lot of thought into. I find that we bring our upbringings, our ideas of discipline from the outside into the classroom a lot of times, whether it's things we've seen in previous classes, things we observed during student teaching, ways that we were disciplined at home. We might, of course, change it because it would look really different. But it's important to put thought into this. So be an authority, not an authoritarian. Being the authority involves commanding a presence, one of confidence that says we know what we're doing and we know our subject. It involves talking calmly and not raising our voice except in very select situations, like when a class fails to respond to numerous requests to be quiet, for instance. Whereas being the authoritarian involves yelling, deriding students, speaking harshly, demanding control. Being authoritative involves calmly engaging students and thus commanding respect. We shouldn't try to prove we are above our students in any way. We're not better than them. Yes, we have more years of experience and more education, and therefore it's a good idea for them to listen to us, right? But teenagers don't always come in with that understanding. Instead, we should aim to be the authority, not one who strives to be a friend to students, but one who is friendly when students approach. So that takes us to the journal prompt for being an authority. In what ways, if any, have you been an authoritarian? Have you yelled at students? Have you shamed them? Have you really gotten on their case when they don't turn an assignment in? When they walk in late, do you say, oh, good of you to join us? Or do you say, hey, why are you late? Holding them accountable is being authoritative, not an authoritarian. Not deriding them or shaming them if they don't have their work turned in on time. Instead, asking them, so what kept you from turning it in? I once had a student who was arriving late to class every single day during first period by 15, 20 minutes and so forth. And it was frustrating to me. He was missing all the explanation and it was disruptive every time. So one day I decided to pull him out away from other students. And I said, hey, why are you late? And he looked at me and he said, I'm sorry. I have to stay at home in the morning because I have a special needs younger sister who gets special transportation to school. And if I leave her outside in her wheelchair, we live in a bad area and she'll be harassed and she could get hurt. So I have to stay with her and make sure she's safe. And sometimes her bus doesn't arrive until after I have to start walking to school. And my heart went out to that young man. I said, you know what? You take care of your sister. I said, I'll adjust and I'll work with you. And from that moment on, he was never more than 5 minutes late because he had an understanding person working with him. Now, I also have had several students arrive late to first period just because, there's too much traffic, or, they can't get up on time. And post-pandemic, that issue has really skyrocketed. So with those kids, I then became more of an more authoritative, more of an authority. I have them answer every day, why are you late? And then I have them brainstorm ways to get there earlier. If it's about traffic, I say, set your alarm earlier and you have to account for the traffic. Because one thing that we need to remember is that we're coaching these kids in life skills, as well as teaching them their subject matter. So let's take a look again at this journal topic. In what ways, if any, have you been an authoritarian? And how did your students respond? Did they push back? It's in a teenager's nature to push back. What does it look like to instead be the authority? How do students respond to this shift in approach? I just gave you an example of how a student responded to my shift in approach with him when he was late. So take again a picture of this so you can work on this journal topic after the presentation. Now, the last item on our list has to do with judgment. Keeping a positive, judgment-free classroom is perhaps the most important one, and maybe the most difficult one for some of us. Judgment is one of the biggest obstacles to learning that a student might face. Students easily pick up on our cues of judgment, on their peers' judgment. Judgment affects the way we act towards and speak to a student. Some students have been judged their entire lives, and often many expect us to judge them. Students are adept at picking up on the changes in our tone or subtle differences in behavior from one student interaction to the next. Their perceptions of when and how they are being negatively judged cause them to respond with hardness and fear as a means of protection and self-preservation. I've had students who at the beginning of the year write me the get to know one-page item, and they will say that in the past they've had teachers tell them they were terrible writers. Their penmanship was awful and they should learn how to type instead. They had teachers who would yell at them in front of the class. And they learned to put up a front. They learned to walk into a classroom expecting harshness, expecting judgment. If I had judged that young man in my example a couple of moments ago and said, why can't you get yourself to class on time every day? Everybody else does. If I had said, what kind of student, comes into class late every day by 20 minutes? What are you, lazy? There's judgment. He would have pushed back. He would have gone into his shell. He still would have taken care of his younger sister, but he would have done so while hurting or while being upset, while getting angry with me. And honestly, I would think he'd have a right to do that. There's also, though, positive judgment. So conversely, students respond positively to judgment they perceive as positive. Psychologists know that students live up to or down to whatever expectations we have for them. Advanced placement students who are in an open access AP program, when told they're in an AP class and that they're smarter than students in other classes, seem to take their assignments and their learning more seriously. That isn't always the case, but studies show that that is predominantly the case. Students who perceive they're in a remedial class behave in ways that prove them unworthy of more challenging opportunities. Any way we look at it, our judgment affects student learning, which affects the classroom environment and our overall success in our classrooms. So what to do with judgment? Now, if you're like me, you grew up with judgment. Judgment was a way that my family disciplined, right? Many of you perhaps had a similar situation. So first, be aware of your judgments towards others. Replace judgmental thoughts with thoughts of acceptance. Take a there is no such thing as a dumb question approach. So how do we change judgment in our minds? Remember, there's always a reason why a student is acting the way they're acting. When you find yourself judging a student, tell yourself there must be a reason. Then, if appropriate to do so, invite the student outside to chat briefly and find out more. And one thing I will say, always keep the door open so that students can't, say, something happened that didn't happen, that, you yelled at them or you did something wrong. Okay. And that brings us to our journal topic. Think of a time when you had judgmental thoughts regarding a student. What was that student's behavior like? And I'm going to add something here, an additional piece. If you had thought differently about that student, how do you think the student's behavior would change? Go ahead and take a picture of this topic. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. So thank you for joining me today for this meeting, this virtual meeting, and I hope to see you again in the future. I wish you all luck and success in everything you do as an educator. Bye now.